Michael Landon's widow, Cindy, has finally broken her silence. And what she's just revealed about their marriage is not what fans expected. For decades, she kept the truth to herself. She didn't correct the rumors. She didn't share the things he said behind closed doors. She didn't explain why, even after his death, she still couldn't let go of what happened. Until now, because at 62, Cindy Landon is finally telling the truth. About the man the world adored, and the marriage that nearly broke her. She was 28, he was 48, and when their eyes met on the set of Little House on the Prairie, Cindy Clerico had no idea her life was about to change forever. She wasn't a star. She wasn't looking for fame. She was just a young makeup artist, quiet, observant, and completely out of place in a world where every man on set carried a script and an ego. But Michael Landon was different, or so it seemed. He was already a legend, a father of 7, a television icon who played the perfect man on screen, and seemed just as perfect off it. To everyone watching, it was a whirlwind romance. He left his second wife. He married Cindy, and he made it clear this was the woman he wanted by his side for the rest of his life. But behind the headlines and honeymoon photos was something far more complicated. Because Cindy didn't just fall in love with a man. She walked straight into a storm. There were whispers on set. Some said the relationship started long before the divorce was official. Others claimed Cindy had been the other woman all along. And as the tabloids circled like vultures, Cindy stayed silent. She refused to defend herself. She wouldn't say how it really began, or how fast things moved. But inside, she was reeling. Michael was charming, yes, but he was also intense. He could light up a room and shut it down in seconds. Cindy wasn't just his partner. She became his protector, his emotional anchor, the one person expected to always be on his side, no matter what happened. She would later say she had no idea what she was walking into. No idea how much of herself she'd have to give up to hold that marriage together. Because being married to a man like Michael Landon came with rules. Unspoken ones, but rigid nonetheless. There were places she wasn't supposed to go, things she wasn't allowed to ask, moments where she had to smile, nod, and pretend that everything was perfect because he needed it to be. Cindy wasn't naive. She knew Michael had a past, 2 failed marriages, strained relationships with children, but he made promises to her, promises she believed in. He said this would be different, that she was different. And for a time, it felt like they had it all. But even in the early days, Cindy noticed something. Something small, something quiet. A voice inside her whispering, "Be careful," because she hadn't just inherited his love. She'd inherited his wounds, his control, his shadow. Michael liked to talk. He liked to be heard. And more than anything, he liked to be adored. That was easy on television. But at home, it meant there was only room for one story. His. And Cindy, she learned to edit herself, to soften her voice, to be the calm in the chaos, even when she felt like she was disappearing. She wasn't just Michael Landon's wife. She was the keeper of his image. And deep down, she feared what would happen if that image ever cracked. From the outside, they were the perfect couple. Red carpet events, family vacations, smiles so polished they seemed untouchable. But inside their home, Cindy Landon was living a life she never imagined, quietly unraveling beneath the weight of a man adored by millions. Michael was a performer even off camera. He carried himself like a leading man at all times, commanding, passionate, larger than life. And for a while, that energy made her feel chosen, special, like she had been handpicked to stand beside greatness. But over time, that same energy started to smother her. He didn't yell, he didn't strike, but he had a way of making silence feel like punishment and disappointment feel like failure. There were days when Cindy felt like she was talking to a character, not a husband, not a partner, just Michael Landon, the myth, the legend, the impossible standard. He needed to be adored. That part never changed. But now he needed it at home too. Cindy wasn't allowed to falter. If she cried, it was drama. If she questioned something, it was disloyalty. And if she ever hinted at needing space, Needing time, needing him to listen, he would retreat. He wasn't cruel, but he was calculated. He could turn the warmth on like a switch, and turn it off just as fast. And so she adapted. She learned how to speak carefully, how to keep her worries hidden, how to make excuses for the coldness in his voice or the distance in his eyes. She told herself it was just stress, pressure, the cost of genius. But in the quiet hours, when the cameras were off and the house was still, Cindy began to feel like a stranger in her own marriage. She had friends who whispered their concerns. "Are you okay?" they'd ask gently. "He seems different behind the scenes." But she always smiled, always defended him, because she loved him, and because she knew what it would look like if she didn't. He had left his previous marriage for her. She'd been painted as the homewrecker, the young replacement. She couldn't give anyone more reasons to talk. And yet, the doubt was always there. What if she wasn't enough? What if she was just a phase like the others? What if she became the woman he left behind, too? There were moments when Michael would disappear emotionally. He'd retreat into his work, or worse, into silence. And Cindy was left trying to decode his moods, his anger, his distance. Once, during an argument, he looked at her like she was a stranger. And in that moment, she realized she didn't actually know what he was capable of. Not fully, not really. And that scared her more than anything. Because if the man who made millions of people believe in love could make her feel this alone, what else had he convinced her to believe? Friends drifted away, not because of any big fight, but because Cindy stopped letting people in. She stopped answering certain questions, stopped showing cracks, stopped trusting that anyone would understand what it meant to live in Michael Landon's shadow. She was the wife, the rock, the one who stood by him through everything. And yet, some nights she felt more like a prop than a partner. She'd lie awake and wonder, did I make a mistake? But by then, it was too late. Because she wasn't just married to a man. She was married to a legacy. And she was already too deep inside the story to walk away without burning it all down. The diagnosis came like a thunderclap. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. There was no time to process, no time to prepare. One minute, they were planning a family trip. The next, Michael was fighting for his life. And just like that, everything shifted. The cameras were gone. The scripts were irrelevant. The public image didn't matter anymore. All that remained was a sick man, and the woman who loved him even after everything. Cindy became the caretaker, the nurse, the scheduler, the emotional shield for their children. She held it together for everyone because Michael couldn't. But behind closed doors, she was falling apart. There were days she couldn't look at him without feeling that sharp sting of resentment. Not because he was dying, but because he waited until now to truly let her in. The walls Michael had spent a lifetime building around himself began to crumble as his body weakened. And slowly he started to talk. Not as the star, not as the legend, but as a man who knew he was running out of time. He'd say things like, "I should have listened more. I didn't always treat you right. You deserved better than what I gave." Cindy would nod, hold his hand, whisper, "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. Not really. Because by the time Michael started to understand how much she had carried, it was already too late to change any of it. In those final months, Cindy lived in a strange limbo, grieving a man who was still alive and mourning a marriage that was never quite what it seemed. And then came the day she never wanted to face. He was lying in bed, barely able to speak. His breathing was shallow. The room was quiet. Cindy sat beside him, holding his hand, listening to the machines echo his fading heartbeat. And then, he said something, so soft she almost missed it. Just a few words, a sentence. But it changed everything. Words she would carry for the rest of her life. Words she never shared publicly. Not in interviews, not in books, not even with close friends. Until now. Because what he said in those final hours made her realize something she had buried deep for years. That even in death, Michael Landon needed to control the narrative. And that she, once again, was expected to protect him. But she's not protecting him anymore. She's protecting herself. and reclaiming the pieces she lost along the way. She wouldn't say exactly what the final words were. Not yet. But she said this: "I've carried a secret for over 30 years. Something he told me when he knew he was leaving. And I kept it buried because I thought that's what he wanted. But I don't owe him that silence anymore." In the years that followed his death, Cindy stayed mostly quiet. She raised their children. She ran the family foundation. She smiled when asked about Michael. But now she's not smiling. Not all the time. Because now she's admitting the truth. That she loved him. But she lost herself in the process. That she gave him everything. And in return was left with more questions than closure. And that marriage, no matter how perfect it looks on TV, can hold pain so deep it takes a lifetime to surface. Started slowly. A rare interview. A quiet line in a magazine article. A speech at a charity event where her voice trembled. Not from nerves, but from the weight of everything she was finally beginning to say. And then, just recently, more than 3 decades after Michael Landon's death, Cindy Landon finally opened up. Not with bitterness, not with anger, but with a calm, almost haunting clarity that only time and silence can create. She didn't name names. She didn't expose private affairs or air dramatic accusations. She simply began to tell her truth. "I spent so many years protecting his image," she said, "but I was losing my own." For years, Cindy had been labeled the young wife, the homewrecker, the one he left his family for. And then, suddenly, she was the grieving widow, the quiet keeper of his legacy. But she was never asked how it felt to carry all of that. How it felt to watch herself disappear in service of a man who never made space for her to be anything more than his. She spoke of the loneliness, of the way Michael controlled every room he walked into, including their home, of how she felt like a character in his life story, not a co-author. And then she said something that stopped people in their tracks. "He was everyone's hero, but I never got to be anyone's." That line hit differently, because behind every powerful man, there's often a woman who has swallowed her voice for so long, she's forgotten what it sounds like. Cindy Landon is remembering now. She's remembering the early days when she thought she was special, only to realize she was replaceable. She's remembering the times she was told not to speak, because it might ruin his image. She's remembering the moments she needed him to just be her husband, and got a performance instead. In recent months, she's begun to share more details. Moments when she questioned whether she had made the right choice. Nights when she sat alone in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. But she's also sharing something deeper, something more powerful than pain. Perspective. She admits she loved him, that parts of their marriage were beautiful, that Michael had sides the world never got to see. Gentle, wounded, fragile sides. But love, she says, isn't always enough, especially when you're not allowed to be fully yourself inside it. What Cindy Landon is doing now isn't revenge. It's not even retribution. It's restoration. She's rebuilding her identity, not as the woman who once stood next to Michael Landon, but as the woman who survived him. She doesn't need the spotlight. She never did. But she does need the truth. And she's finally speaking it. Not to destroy his legacy, but to make space for her own. Because there's something powerful about a woman finding her voice after 30 years of silence. It doesn't come out loud. It comes out steady. And when it does, people listen. The reaction was instant and overwhelming. When Cindy Landon's words began to circulate, fans didn't know what to think. Some were heartbroken. Others were furious. And many, especially those who had grown up idolizing Michael Landon, were simply stunned. How could the man who gave us Little House on the Prairie, Bonanza, and Highway to Heaven, the ultimate family man on screen, have made his wife feel so invisible? Comment sections filled up with disbelief. No, not Michael. Not him. Say what you want, he was a good man. He loved his family. Why speak up now? He's not here to defend himself. But others, they saw it differently. She stayed quiet for over 30 years. That's not attention-seeking, that's survival. I believe her. You don't carry pain that long unless it's real. This doesn't ruin his legacy. It just shows he was human, and so was she. It's hard, people said. Hard to hold two truths at once. That Michael Landon could be a brilliant actor, a loving father to some, a TV icon, and also a man who failed his wife behind closed doors. But that's what makes Cindy's story so powerful. She's not asking anyone to tear him down. She's simply asking to be seen. For decades, Michael's fans saw him as the gold standard, the moral compass of an entire generation. But now, they're being asked to confront the uncomfortable reality behind that perfection. And many can't, or won't, because when a man like Michael Landon falls from grace, even just a little, it feels like losing a piece of our own past. People remember watching Little House with their parents, crying over Highway to Heaven, seeing Michael as the kind of father they wished they had. To hear that he may have made his wife feel small, controlled, or emotionally discarded. It feels personal. But Cindy isn't trying to rewrite history. She's trying to finish a sentence that was never allowed to end. And slowly, more people are starting to listen. Older women, especially those who grew up in silent marriages of their own, have written letters to Cindy, left comments, shared stories. I know what it's like to disappear in someone else's life. Thank you for speaking. You gave me the courage to look at my own past. And that, perhaps, is the most heartbreaking part of all. That her story isn't rare. It's just rarely told. Cindy spent years believing that if she stayed quiet, she was doing the right thing. Protecting Michael's legacy, shielding her kids, avoiding headlines. But silence doesn't heal. It just hides. And now, after decades of burying her voice, she's finally using it. Some fans may never forgive her for breaking the illusion. Others may cling to the image of Michael Landon they always loved. But there's a quiet strength in what Cindy is doing, not demanding to be heard, but allowing herself to be. And in doing so, she's giving permission to every woman who's ever felt erased by someone else's story to start telling their own. Today, Cindy Landon lives a quieter life. She doesn't chase attention. She doesn't appear on reality shows or write explosive memoirs. She still attends charity events, still supports causes Michael believed in, still honors the parts of their life together that were good. But she does it on her terms now. And for the first time in decades, she's starting to feel like herself again. There's a calmness in her voice these days, a softness in her presence that feels earned, not performed. Because Cindy has spent the last 30 years putting everyone else first. Now, she's finally asking herself a different question. What do I want? After Michael died, the public expected her to preserve his memory, and she did. Quietly, carefully, she raised their children with dignity. She protected his image from gossip and scandal. But what no one asked was what it cost her to do that. She was 34 when she became a widow, and for years she was trapped in two identities. The young wife who was blamed for breaking up a family, and the grieving widow who wasn't allowed to say a single negative word about the man who left her behind. She carried it all, until now. And while Cindy still speaks respectfully of Michael in public, she's no longer erasing herself in the process. She talks about the pain, the loss, the complexity, and she talks about the healing, too. In a rare recent appearance, someone asked her what she would say to her younger self. Back on the set of Little House, when Michael first looked at her with those piercing eyes, she paused, smiled faintly, and said, I would tell her to hold on to herself, to not get swept up in someone else's story, no matter how big it is, because someday you're going to need your voice. And if you've lost it, you'll have to fight like hell to get it back. That's what Cindy Landon is doing now. Not fighting Michael's memory, but fighting for her own. She'll never be able to rewrite the past, but she doesn't need to, because the truth, the full truth, is finally starting to surface. And the truth is this: she loved him, she stood by him, but she also suffered in silence. And it's taken her half a lifetime to admit that. Now, as she moves through her 60s with grace, she's not looking back with regret. She's looking forward with clarity. She's learned that love and pain can exist side by side, that a man can be a hero on screen and a stranger at home, that grief isn't always about losing someone. Sometimes, it's about rediscovering yourself after they're gone. And perhaps most powerful of all, she's learned that speaking up doesn't destroy a legacy, completes it, because Michael Landon wasn't perfect, and neither was their marriage. But in finally telling the story behind the myth, Cindy isn't just setting the record straight. She's setting herself free. For more of the latest news, check out this video.